Trade unions in Haiti push for more protests against the Moise government's alleged corruption. Brazil's Supreme Court postpones a ruling that could have seen the former president Lula da Silva freed from prison. And it's official, FARC party member Jesus Santrich has finally been sworn in as a senator. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo. This is from the South. The National Assembly in Haiti has suspended its sessions after days of protests left at least 2 people dead and several wounded. Meanwhile, trade unions and social organizations continue to push for the continuation of the national strike against corruption and the country's current economic situation. From Port-au-Prince, independent journalist Kenny Isidore has the details.
The national strike continues in Haiti. Supermarkets, schools, and banks remain closed. Meanwhile, citizens in Port-au-Prince are incensed by the murder of journalist Rospide Petition. Petition was killed last night while he was returning home in a car owned by Radio Sans Fin. There was also an attack against media personnel on Monday, as 3 vehicles owned by Radio Tele-Guinéen were burned by a group of people. That night, President Jovenel Moïse was expected to address members of the public live on social media. However, he canceled the speech. The opposition, as well as various groups, called for Moïse's resignation, as they blame him for the country's current issues. Protests against the president have increased, with an anti-corruption movement launched last year via social media.
And also in Haiti, internationally renowned aid organization Oxfam has come under fire for its mishandling of serious sexual misconduct claims against its staff. Following an 18-month-long investigation, a charity commission found there was a culture of poor behavior among Oxfam staff sent to help victims of the 2010 earthquake on the Caribbean island. The report published on Tuesday claims that Oxfam failed to either properly investigate or fully disclose allegations that children as young as 12 were victims of sexual abuse at the hands of an Oxfam boss. The anti-poverty organization was also severely criticized back in February of 2018 after it emerged that some of its workers engaged in sex parties with prostitutes after the humanitarian disaster in Haiti. Brazil's Supreme Court has put off until a later session a decision on an Habeas Corpus petition that could have seen the former president Luis Inacio Lula Da Silva freed from prison. A group of Lula supporters demonstrated outside the court in Brasilia as a majority of judges voted individually in favor of the Habeas Corpus petition. This was on behalf of all those who were automatically imprisoned after the rejection of their second appeal and could apply to Lula and several thousands other prisoners. But the Supreme Court agreed to take a final decision at a plenary session yet to be arranged. The Supreme Court has also agreed to hear a separate Habeas Corpus petition dealing specifically with bias on the part of the judges in Lula's case on June 25th. This follows the revelations made on Monday of a conspiracy to block Lula from taking part in last year's elections by the Justice Minister and then Judge Sergio Moro.
The material just released fully supports what we have always said as the defense team. The new documents show again that Judge Sergio Moro was not an impartial actor. He actually coordinated the accusations against the former president and then passed judgment on the case that he himself had built.
The revelations of alleged collusion by Brazil's current Minister of Justice to imprison Lula da Silva continue to shake Brazil. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Brian Meir, has more.
The leaked social media conversations that The Intercept released the day before yesterday, showing members of the Operation Car Wash Task Force, which arrested Luis Inacio Lula Da Silva last year, talking about things like they didn't have the evidence needed to arrest the former president, talking about how they were working secretly to damage the PT party's attempts at winning the presidential election last year, even though the PT was leading in all the polls beforehand, and how they worked to prevent Luis Inacio Lula da Silva from speaking publicly before the elections, have generated massive shockwaves across Brazilian society. The powerful Brazilian Order of Lawyers, the OAB, which administers the qualification exam needed for anyone to legally practice law in Brazil, issued a statement calling for Sergio Moro to immediately be removed from his post as Justice Minister in far-right President Jair Bolsonaro's cabinet. The powerful right-wing newspaper Estado do São Paulo, which publicly supported Operation Car Wash all along, is now calling for Sergio Moro to resign from his post. And Lula's defense team filed a motion for habeas corpus to throw out all charges against him that were incurred through the Lava Jato investigation due to the fraudulent behavior of the investigators. Now today, Supreme Court Justice Gilmar Mauro ruled that the Supreme Court will be able to vote on this habeas corpus on June 25th, and it could result in the immediate freedom of the political prisoner Luis Inacio Lula da Silva.
We thank Brian for that report. The struggle for land rights is one of the main issues facing campesino communities in northern Brazil. In the MST community of Maria Aparecida, many are standing up for their rights against the interest of private companies.
Sebastian Miranda is 69 and has lived for almost a decade in the Maria Aparecida camp in the Brazilian state of Rio Grande. Along with 7 of his 11 children, he produces food such as beans, corn, yuca and potatoes on several hectares of land. However, his family and more than 30 others face the threat of eviction. That's in the interests of wind energy companies.
We
have a big disaster here. A tractor ran over the yucca plantation in the middle of the field, and we couldn't do anything. There I said to everyone, let's plant again. They reply, Sebastian, we're going to have twice the work. We've already lost the plantation. But I said, guys, it's much worse to lower your head and cross your arms.
In 2010, more than 100 families from the landless workers movement occupied around 400 hectares of unused land. For 9 years without access to water and electricity, they've gone through several attempts at evicting them and destroying their homes and plantations.
Our goal is to democratize the land here, as there's plenty of real estate speculation, of tourists, of international businessmen, and also an occupation that has directly conflict with wind energy companies. This occupation is also the experience of the MST, what we call our popular agrarian reform that has its objective, besides democratizing the land, producing healthy food and building new relationships.
Lawmakers from the Workers' Party advocate for a better distribution of land and support for the development of family-based agriculture that's responsible for 70% of production in Brazil.
Land has always been something very important for the left wing. The truth is that it's our patrimony. It's a common good that unites us. So the union of the left, of the parties, of the social movements around agrarian reform, around agroecological production is paramount if people want sovereignty, food sovereignty, if people want to think about the freedom of people.
On 4 occasions, Sebastian Miranda has seen his plantations destroyed, along with other residents of the MST camp. He slept for a month in the rain after the passage of tractors. However, they still tell the story and lead the resistance, defending their right to housing, work, education, and health.
In Colombia, FARC party member Jesus Santrich has finally been sworn in as a senator. Nonetheless, this doesn't stop the investigation currently in place against him for alleged drug trafficking after the peace agreements were signed. Colombia's President Iván Duque had already previously told the Attorney General to suspend Santrich from his Senate position. Santrich was facing an extradition request by the U.S. last month, but was eventually released by the Supreme Court due to a lack of evidence.
I'm here with my lawyers and ready to present all the information that the judges may ask. We have to wait for the investigation, to listen to the accusations, and I will respond with the truth. I think we have to destroy hate and to continue creating hope in the process of reconciliation and stop polarizing the country. After this, I will go to special jurisdiction for peace and I'll be back in Congress.
The FMLN political party in El Salvador has rejected accusations by the newly elected president, saying the party funded criminal gangs to attack the police and destabilize the government. Party leaders arrived at the Attorney General's office to demand an investigation against President Nayib Bukele for slandering them in alleging they committed several crimes. They have also asked for the president to testify before a court to explain his accusations.
El día de ayer en la tarde.
We are here because yesterday, the now president, in an irresponsible way, and in the face of his inability of presenting proposals to solve country's issues, said that what is happening now is that leaders of the FMLN are supporting criminals, the maras, and he says that is the reason why El Salvador has so many issues.
And coming up after the break, Venezuelan Foreign Minister rejects statements by presidents of Colombia and Argentina, and teachers strike in Chile. More details after the break. Welcome back. Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza has rejected recent statements made by the presidents of Colombia and Argentina regarding his country. Both presidents met on Monday and said they support increased pressure against the Bolivarian government. In a tweet, Arreaza said what South America needs is an end to drug production and trafficking, human rights violations, war, and paramilitarism. He also called for an end to false positives and narco politics in Colombia. Meanwhile, Arreaza took a shot at Argentina's President Mauricio Macri, stating that Argentinians demand an end to his government's infamous and failed neoliberal policies. Venezuelan grassroots organizations are at the forefront of protecting the social gains of the Bolivarian Revolution. These groups, also known as colectivos, are often misrepresented in the media as they support Venezuela's sovereignty and fight against imperialism. Let's take a look at the work they do in communities all across the nation.
In the neighborhood known as January 23rd, a security post introduces everyone to La Piedrita, the colectivo in charge of this place. Among the projects they manage are a bakery, a cafeteria, street cleaning operations, and growing various crops, while also maintaining control in one of the most emblematic neighborhoods of Caracas.
This was a dump, and little by little we recovered it. Little by little, we build what you see here now. Our community has land used to grow vegetables for the people.
The January 23rd neighborhood has a history of social organization dating back to the 60s. Another 10 colectivos can be found here, developing multiple projects both for self-defense and for political growth.
Colectivos existed long before Commander Chavez. They are social work groups that became larger collectives after Chavez rose to power.
The determination and commitment of colectivos to the Bolivarian Revolution often creates fear among the opposition and corporate media, who frequently call them criminals. In April 2019, the National Assembly presented a bill that qualifies them as terrorist groups.
The paramilitary collectives are criminals who will sooner rather than later pay for the crimes they're committing against Venezuelans, both inside and outside the country.
But colectivos strongly reject these accusations. Some are linked to political parties, while others remain autonomous, but they all provide support for many neighborhoods.
What hurts them is that you can see plainly that there's no kind of criminal element. We promote peace in many neighborhoods of Venezuela.
The revolutionary collectivos support the social policies of the revolutionary government inside communities. What we want is to live in peace so that our communities live well, and that there's easy access to goods, services, and medicines.
In May 2019, La Piedrita hosted a meeting of 100 colectivos from different states, where they confirmed their support for the Bolivarian Revolution, while also asking for a greater role for social organizations.
Strengthening people power is fundamental. We want to promote self-management so that people can resist and fight against U.S. imperialism.
There are hundreds of colectivos all over Venezuela, working closely with other grassroots organizations for Venezuela's defense and development.
Thousands of Chilean teachers marched to Congress in Valparaiso on Tuesday as part of the national strike in defense of public education. According to the leaders of the march, the protests are geared towards improving the quality of public education in Chile, since the current government is in favor of privatizing the sector. Various social movements have also joined the group.
This is a very unjust fight because the government has all the political and economic power. And we are the teachers. We are honest people. I think people understand the importance of our fight. We have had lots of support in the streets, and not only from teachers, but also from various social movements.
This is not a march for better pay, but for quality education. For example, in infrastructure. There are some schools where there are rats, where the students don't have books to study, where teachers have not been paid for over 4 years. And recently, they have made the study of history, physical education, and art optional.
Moving on, authorities in Mexico have continued to crack down on Central American asylum seekers passing through the country on their way to the U.S. On Monday, dozens of migrants were detained by immigration authorities in Chiapas after they crossed the Suchiate River. These arrests follow the deployment of thousands of security forces by the government after a deal was signed with the U.S. government. Migrants' rights activists have condemned the deal, saying it endangers the lives of migrants trying to escape violence in their countries.
Tapachula is a prison city. Tapachula is a city where migrants can't leave, even if they wanted to. And this idea of militarization of opening quarters for soldiers, it would make it impossible for them to move. It's basically condemning people who want to escape violence and seek safety. They will be stuck.
And Mexico has set up a special commission to analyze and address migration flow. The commission, led by Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard, seeks to create a system of regional immigration management. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador says Mexico is prepared to work with other countries while defining the underlying causes of recent migration flows.
The most effective and human way to deal with the migratory phenomenon in any part of the world is to address the actual causes of migration. This will not be solved by the use of force.
Coming up after the break, protests in Algeria calling for a democratic government. Stay with us. Welcome back. 6 people died when a fire swept through a psychiatric hospital in the Ukrainian city of Odessa. 4 others were hospitalized while another 9 escaped unharmed. The fire erupted late on Monday evening in the 1-story building. The cause of the blaze has not yet been established. Thousands of Algerian students protested in Algiers on Monday, calling for a democratic government. The students demand the removal of the ruling elite as they push for electoral reforms. Protesters are also calling for the resignation of interim president Abdelkader Ben Salah, who had been initially elected to lead for 90 days until elections are held.
Our demands are that the remnants of the regime would leave, that would have honorable and transparent elections. Our demand is that the remnants of the regime would leave and live.
A civilian state and not a military state. We want a civilian state and no military rule. We demand that they leave and we refuse to have dialogues with them.
The decriminalization of homosexuality in Botswana has paved the way for people to challenge laws in which LGBTQ have been excluded. This was expressed by Habe Pershane, an advocate for gender dynamics, working with countries in the region on LGBT and women's rights issues.
As for individuals, it means now there's more openness towards advocacy. There's more that can be challenged to say that if this is a privilege, it's not a privilege, if this is my right. At the end of the day, like each and every citizen, I have equal rights to access this. I have equal rights to access workspace without being discriminated. I have equal rights to access to choose who's my life partner. And when that is being violated, now it means individuals also have a stand of arguing and pursuing cases to say that I'm being violated here.
Pishana also spoke about what's next for LGBTQ in Botswana.
also we have to be careful in terms of how we approach it. This is relatively new. This is what we need to use the case of Botswana to challenge a few things. Start off where we are always starting off as activists. We start first by campaigning, making the society understand what it means to have same-sex marriage before we can even go ahead and challenge it. So there's a lot of work that will have to be put in place before thinking of other new court cases which we would want recognition in different laws, because of course it's going to take a lot of work.
Lawyers for the WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, as well as his supporters, have expressed grave concern over his health in recent days. Assange has been receiving medical attention at Belmarsh Prison in southeast London as he waits for a decision on the United States request for his extradition. Our correspondent Pablo Navarrete caught up with his father, John Shipton, as he was on his way to visit him.
I think the first hearing is on the 14th, just a couple of days away. But there have now been 9 years of preliminary investigation in Sweden, with 4 prosecutors, 2 interviews. It only took 8 years to put a man on the moon, so you can see that the pursuit of Julian is a persecution, is not a prosecution, not even the most convicted person would believe that it's anything to do with justice or anything other than the persecution of Julian at the behest of the United States.
The British government claims that no one is beyond the law and that it's acting, that British justice is merely doing, its role. What would you say about that?
Well, the expression, I guess, that no one's beyond the law doesn't include the United Kingdom, which has broken every single convention that it signed to as far as asylum seekers, asylees, dragging Julian from the embassy, refusal to allow an asylee to travel over their land to take up the asylum in Ecuador, refusal to acknowledge the working group on arbitrary detentions report that Julian was in fact arbitrarily detained, refusing to acknowledge the rapporteur on torture, the rapporteur on torture, Mesler's report. Every convention and law the UK breaks at will.
Thousands of Palestinians have gathered in Gaza to mourn the death of a doctor who was killed by Israeli forces. A funeral was held for Mohammed al-Jihadi, a Palestinian medic who was shot by an Israeli officer during recent clashes along the Gaza border. Al-Hidali spent almost a month in intensive care, but eventually died from the wounds. Relatives and co-workers remembered his work to help others.
There was a young man injured in his head, and Mohammed went to rescue him and control his bleeding. That was when Mohammed was directly targeted in the face by the occupation army, which led to his death.
And now from the sports desk, as we continue coverage of the Cricket World Cup. Earlier, Bangladesh's match against Sri Lanka has been called off without a ball being bowled due to heavy rains in Bristol. With both sides taking a point from the washout, Sri Lanka moved up to 5th in the table and Bangladesh climbed to 7th. This is the 3rd match of the World Cup to be abandoned. The previous highest number of abandoned games in a World Cup was 2 in 1992 and 2003. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.